I first noticed the sound behind the walls on a quiet Sunday night. It wasn't loud enough to wake anyone, but I live alone, and silence makes small noises feel bigger than they really are. At first, it sounded like pipes expanding or the old structure of the building settling after a long day of heat. A soft tapping, then a slow dragging sound, like something moving carefully where it shouldn't be. I ignored it for days. Apartments have strange echoes. Neighbors drop things. Air moves through spaces you don't understand. That's what I told myself every time the sound returned just after midnight. Always at the same hour. Always slow. Patient. Deliberate. One night, curiosity won. I pressed my ear against the living room wall. The sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt wrong. Too aware, too precise. Like whatever had been moving knew I was listening. I stepped back, heart racing, waiting for the noise to continue. Nothing happened. Just the steady hum of the refrigerator and the faint buzz of a streetlight outside. That should have been the end of it. But the next morning I noticed something strange near the baseboard. A thin line of dust had been disturbed, forming a small curved trail that hadn't been there before. It looked almost like a handprint, faint and incomplete. I told myself it was nothing, until the tapping started again that night. This time it came from a different wall. Slow, careful, closer to the bedroom. I walked through the apartment, trying to follow the sound, but it kept shifting. First behind the kitchen, then near the hallway, then somewhere above me. Every time I moved, it stopped. Every time I sat still, it returned. Days passed like that. Sleep became difficult. The apartment felt smaller, heavier. Sometimes I thought I heard breathing behind the walls. Not loud, just a faint rhythm that didn't match my own. One evening, while moving a shelf to clean behind it, I found a section of drywall that felt hollow when I knocked on it. The sound was different from the rest of the wall. Deeper, empty. I shouldn't have touched it. But I did. The corner of the panel shifted slightly under my fingers, revealing a thin gap no wider than a coin. Cold air slipped through, carrying a smell I couldn't place. Not rot, not mold, just old. I leaned closer, and for a brief second I heard movement from the other side, not scratching, not pipes, footsteps. Slow, cautious footsteps that stopped the moment my shadow crossed the wall. I stepped back quickly, my mind racing for explanations. Maybe an abandoned maintenance space, maybe hidden wiring or ventilation. Anything that made sense. That night I left the lights on again. The tapping didn't return. Instead, I heard something worse. A faint whisper, barely louder than the air moving through the room. Not words, just the sound of someone trying to speak without being heard. I froze, staring at the wall, waiting for it to happen again. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. The apartment returned to that heavy silence, the kind that makes you question your own memory. I thought about calling someone, the landlord, maintenance, anyone, but I couldn't explain what I'd heard without sounding irrational. So I waited. The next morning I checked the gap in the drywall again. It was gone. The panel looked untouched, perfectly aligned with the rest of the wall. No dust disturbed, no sign it had ever moved. Only a faint mark remained where my fingers had pressed the night before. I tried to laugh it off, but the feeling didn't leave. Because later that night, as I lay in bed pretending to sleep, I heard a slow knock from inside the wall. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. And for the first time since moving into that apartment, I realized something that made the silence feel alive. The sounds weren't random. They were waiting for me to answer. And even now, when the apartment goes silent, I still wait for the next knock. I stayed awake for hours after that, counting every second between the sounds. The silence felt heavier than before, like the apartment itself was listening with me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that old buildings make strange noises, that stress can twist ordinary sounds into something threatening. But deep down, I knew the pattern was too precise to be random. The next night, I left a glass against the wall, pressing my ear close to it like people do in movies. For a moment, there was nothing. Then faintly, I heard movement again. Slow, careful, almost cautious. It didn't sound like someone trying to escape. It sounded like someone trying to stay hidden. And I knew it was still there, listening from inside the dark.